The billionaire's screams echoed through the alley, until a voice sliced through the storm, "Touch him one more time and see what happens." 3 grown men froze mid-stomp and whipped their heads toward the alley entrance. Out of the shadows stepped a soaked, exhausted Maid, stones in her hand, fury in her eyes. The rain itself seemed to hold its breath. What they saw made them burst into the kind of laughter that echoes off brick walls and settles in your bones. "Touch him one more time and see what happens." 3 grown men froze mid-stomp and whipped their heads toward the alley entrance. What they saw made them burst into the kind of laughter that echoes off brick walls and settles in your bones. Iona stood there in the shadows. 21, small-framed, wearing a faded hotel maid's uniform soaked through from the rain. Her work badge still dangled from her pocket. One hand clutched 3 smooth stones. She looked exhausted, like someone who'd scrubbed other people's messes all day, yet her eyes blazed with something these men had never seen before. Pure, unfiltered defiance. The first thug, tall with a jagged scar running down his cheek, bent over laughing. "Bro, what is this? The maid service coming to clean up?" The second one wiped tears from his eyes. "Little lady thinks she's some kind of superhero or something." The third attacker, massive, built like a concrete wall, took 3 threatening steps toward her, still grinning. "Sweetheart, you better run back to whatever hotel you escaped from before you end up bleeding right next to this fool." He kicked the man at his feet hard. That bleeding man was Elijah Cross, billionaire tech investor, the kind of man whose name decorated buildings across the skyline. The kind who had politicians in his pocket and moved through life untouched by its harshness. But right now, he was broken and bleeding. And a hotel maid was his only hope. Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Warm welcome to the family, enjoy the story. Lightning cracked overhead, illuminating the narrow space between luxury apartments. Rain poured mercilessly, washing blood into storm drains. Iona planted her feet firmly on the wet pavement, her fingers tightening around the first stone. "Last chance," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "Walk away." They laughed harder. The sound echoed off brick walls, drowning out the distant sirens. Biggest mistake of their lives. The first stone left her hand with astonishing speed. Not thrown, but launched, a perfect extension of her will. It struck the largest thug directly between the eyes with a sickening crack. He stumbled backward, expression shifting from amusement to shock as blood mixed with rainwater on his face. "What the second thug reached inside his jacket. Iona's second throw came faster than the first. The stone caught him in the throat. He dropped to his knees, gasping, clawing at his windpipe. The third man, the one with the scar, pulled a knife. "You're dead," he snarled, lunging forward. How many of us walk past suffering every day, pretending we don't see? Iona didn't hesitate. Her final stone flew with deadly precision, striking his wrist. The knife clattered to the ground. Before he could recover, she was already moving, not away, but toward him, picking up the fallen knife with surprising calmness. "Who are you?" he demanded, cradling his injured wrist, fear replacing arrogance. Rain plastered Iona's hair to her face as she stared him down. "I'm the woman you shouldn't have underestimated." The thug backed away, then turned and ran, leaving his friends scrambling to their feet behind him. Their footsteps faded into the storm, leaving only the rhythm of rain hitting concrete and the billionaire's labored breathing. Iona knelt beside Elijah Cross. Up close, he looked different than his magazine covers, vulnerable, human. Blood trickled from multiple cuts on his face. His expensive suit was torn and muddied. His eyes fluttered, struggling to focus. "Don't move," she whispered, checking his injuries with careful hands. "Help is coming." "Why?" he managed, voice barely audible above the rain. "Why did you help me?" Iona paused, the question catching her off guard. Why had she stopped? Every day she walked past suffering. Homeless veterans on corners, elderly women counting pennies for medicine, children sleeping in cars. Why risk her life for this man who had more money than she'd see in 10 lifetimes? Because someone should, she finally said. Even for people like you. Distant sirens grew louder. Red and blue lights began to reflect off wet pavement at the alley's entrance. Someone in one of the luxury apartments must have called the police. Elijah's hand weakly caught her wrist as she started to rise. "Wait," he whispered, desperation in his voice. "Your name. Please." Something in his eyes made her hesitate, recognition, perhaps, or the beginning of understanding. "Iona," she said after a moment. "Iona," he repeated, the name foreign on his tongue. "I won't forget." She gently removed his hand. "You will," she said softly. "People like you always do." As emergency vehicles screeched to a halt at the alley entrance, Iona slipped back into the shadows between buildings. Paramedics rushed forward, their voices urgent, equipment rattling. Police officers scanned the scene, radios crackling with static. But Elijah Cross, despite his injuries, kept his eyes fixed on the darkness where she had disappeared, a single question burning through the fog of pain: who was this woman who threw stones like they were extensions of her soul? And why did he feel like he'd seen her somewhere before, perhaps cleaning his hotel room or serving his coffee? Someone he'd looked right through as if she didn't exist. As consciousness slipped away, Elijah made a silent promise to find her again. Not to thank her, but to understand why she had seen him when he had never truly seen her. Homeless maid saves billionaire with stone-throwing skills. The headline screamed across every news channel by morning. Smartphone footage from a nearby apartment window had captured the entire incident, grainy but clear enough to show a woman in a hotel uniform taking down 3 attackers with nothing but stones. Iona stared at the newspaper someone had left on a bench, her own blurry face looking back at her. Her stomach twisted. Being seen was dangerous. Being famous was worse. She pulled her hoodie lower and kept walking, past the crowds gathered around electronics store windows where her story played on repeat. Reporters called her the Stone Angel. Social media erupted with hashtags. Politicians praised her courage while promising crackdowns on violent crime. Everyone wanted to know, who was she? Where did she learn to throw like that? And why had she disappeared? 3 miles away, in a forgotten corner beneath the West Side Bridge, Iona pushed aside a tattered blue tarp that concealed her home, a shipping crate abandoned years ago, now lined with cardboard and whatever blankets she'd managed to salvage from dumpsters. A plastic crate held her few possessions. 2 uniform shirts, a pair of jeans, a toothbrush worn nearly flat, and a small pouch of smooth stones. She collapsed onto her makeshift bed, exhaustion washing over her. Her shift at the kitchen of Lou's Diner had been particularly brutal today. 12 hours of scrubbing pots for cash under the table, all while the television above the sink replayed her moment of accidental heroism. "That girl's gonna get a reward," the cook had said, pointing at the screen with a greasy spatula. Cross Industries offering $50,000 to find her. 50,000. The number echoed in Iona's mind as she rubbed her raw, chapped hands together. Enough for an apartment. Maybe even school. A real chance. But Iona knew better than to believe in chances. Ever noticed how people are fascinated by heroes but forget the homeless person they step over on their way to work? 2 years on the streets had taught her that visibility was a double-edged sword. Visible meant vulnerable. And vulnerable meant broken, like her mother had been, worked to death cleaning hotel rooms, buried in a pauper's grave when her heart finally gave out. Iona reached for the pouch of stones, running her fingers over their smooth surfaces. Her father's voice echoed in her memory, "Aim small, miss small, little one. Life doesn't give second shots." He'd taught her to throw when she was 6, using pebbles to knock cans off fence posts behind their trailer. Before he disappeared. Before everything fell apart. Across town, in the private wing of Mercy Hospital, Elijah Cross opened his eyes for the first time in 36 hours. The room swam into focus, white walls, beeping monitors, expensive flower arrangements from people he barely knew. "He's awake," a nurse called out, and suddenly his space filled with doctors, security personnel, and his anxious assistant clutching a tablet. "Mr. Cross, you're extremely lucky," the doctor said, checking his pupils. 3 broken ribs, mild concussion, but nothing permanent. Elijah wasn't listening. A single image consumed his thoughts, a woman with stones in her hand and fire in her eyes. The same woman he'd seen countless times before but never truly noticed. "The maid," he said, voice hoarse. "Where is she?" His assistant stepped forward. "Sir, we're doing everything to find her. Police are reviewing security footage from nearby buildings. Your PR team has launched a reward campaign." "No." Elijah struggled to sit up, wincing at the pain in his side. "No cameras. No press. I want her found quietly." The room fell silent. Elijah Cross never did anything quietly. "Sir," his head of security cleared his throat, "she's likely homeless. Our sources say she worked at various hotels but lost her housing last year. She could be anywhere in the city." "Then search everywhere," Elijah said, a strange intensity in his voice. "Every shelter, every kitchen, every alley." His assistant exchanged worried glances with the security team. "Mr. Cross, you have the Singapore deal closing tomorrow, the board meeting on Thursday, and the foundation gala. Cancel them." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Sometimes we recognize ourselves in the strangers who save us. Have you ever been seen by someone when you felt invisible? Back under the bridge, Iona froze at the sound of voices approaching. Flashlight beams swept across the concrete pillars. Men in uniforms. "Police said check all homeless camps," one called out. "Cross Industries wants her found by morning." Iona's heart hammered against her ribs as she grabbed her backpack and the stone pouch. No time for anything else. She slipped out the back of her shelter and down the embankment, keeping low in the shadows. Behind her, officers discovered her makeshift home, rifling through what little she'd left behind. One held up her spare uniform shirt. Bingo! Iona didn't look back. She moved through the darkness with practiced invisibility, the rhythm of her footsteps matching the pounding of her pulse. She needed a new hiding place. A new plan. The irony wasn't lost on her. For years, she'd been invisible, cleaning hotel rooms while guests looked through her, scrubbing pots while diners enjoyed meals she'd never afford, sleeping under bridges while the city bustled above, unseeing. Now, suddenly, everyone wanted to see her. In his hospital room, Elijah Cross watched dawn break over the city skyline, his mind racing with something unfamiliar, purpose. Or perhaps guilt. He'd built an empire by seeing opportunities others missed. But he'd missed her. Walked past her. Perhaps even spoken to her without remembering her face. "I'll find you," he whispered to the rising sun. "Whatever it takes." Miles away, hidden in the crawlspace of an abandoned factory, Iona clutched her stones like talismans and made a different promise. "You won't." Two forces set on collision course, neither understanding that finding and being found would change them both forever. Iona's fingers traced invisible patterns on marble floors, her knees aching against cold stone as she scrubbed. Not today, 2 years ago, when she still had a life. When her mother still breathed. "You missed a spot," the hotel manager said, pointing to an already gleaming section of the Marlowe Hotel's grand lobby. "Do it again." Memory blurred into nightmare as Iona jolted awake, her back pressed against the wall of the abandoned warehouse where she'd hidden for the past 3 days. Rain drummed against metal roofing, leaking through in steady streams that formed puddles on concrete. Dawn hadn't broken yet. She'd been dreaming of her old life again. The life before streets and hunger. before invisibility became her only safety. The Marlowe Hotel, 13 months of her life spent scrubbing floors, changing sheets, cleaning toilets for guests who never looked her in the eyes. Who left messes like it was their right and her purpose. Who tipped with coins and complaints. Still, it had been shelter. Stability. A paycheck that kept her mother's medicine coming just long enough to prolong the inevitable. Iona reached for her backpack, pulling out a half-eaten sandwich she'd salvaged from a restaurant dumpster. Breakfast. Lunch too, if she rationed carefully. Have you ever had to choose between eating or staying warm? That moment when basic needs become luxury items. Her mother's cough had started small, just an irritation, she'd said. Nothing serious. By the time they realized it was something in her lungs, something growing, spreading, it was already too late. Insurance had lapsed. Specialists cost money they didn't have. Iona had worked double shifts, triple shifts when she could get them. Slept 2, maybe 3 hours between jobs. Cleaned the penthouses with extra care, hoping for bigger tips from the wealthy guests. One of those penthouses had belonged to Elijah Cross. She remembered him now, the man she'd saved. He'd stayed at the Marlowe for a week while his downtown condo underwent renovations. He'd walked past her cart every morning, never once noticing her existence. She'd been invisible then. Convenient. Now she was visible. Dangerous. Outside the warehouse, sirens wailed in the distance. Another sweep. They'd been coming more frequently, police, private security, even news vans combing the city for the Stone Angel. The reward had doubled overnight. Posters with her blurry image appeared on street corners. Iona peered through a crack in the boarded windows. 3 blocks down, a black SUV moved slowly down the street, men in suits speaking into radios. She closed her eyes, remembering her father's lessons behind their trailer park home. She'd been 7, maybe 8. Too small for the baseball their neighbors played, but desperate to join in. They think you're weak because you're small, her father had said, placing a smooth stone in her palm. But stones don't care about size. They care about aim and intention. Day after day, he'd taught her to throw, at cans, at fence posts, at chalk marks on trees. Aim small, miss small, he'd repeated. Find the center of what matters. The rest is just noise. A month later, he'd disappeared. Another man swallowed by the system, by debts, by whatever demons chased him away from his family. All he left behind was a pouch of perfect throwing stones and a daughter who never missed. When was the last time someone taught you something that saved you years later? Those lessons that seem small until they become everything. Across town, Elijah Cross discharged himself from the hospital against medical advice. His ribs screamed with every movement, but he ignored the pain, fixated on a mission his team couldn't understand. Sir, please, his assistant begged as they entered his penthouse. The board is concerned. The press is speculating. Your investors. My investors can wait, Elijah said, moving to the wall of windows overlooking the city. His city, people called it. As if wealth entitled him to ownership of streets he rarely walked. On his desk lay police reports, employee files from every major hotel, homeless shelter registries, all searching for one woman. We've identified her, sir, his head of security said, placing a thin file before him. Iona Mills. 21. Former employee at the Marlowe, West Side Suites, and most recently, kitchen help at various restaurants. No fixed address since her mother died 18 months ago. Elijah opened the file. A staff ID photo stared back at him, younger Iona, hair pulled back neatly, eyes forward but guarded. The proper, invisible hotel maid who cleaned his messes without comment. He'd never noticed her then. Not once in all the times she must have entered his suite, changed his sheets, replaced his towels. But she had noticed him. Enough to recognize him bleeding in an alley. Enough to risk her life. Her mother worked at the Marlowe for 12 years, the security chief continued. Died of aggressive lung cancer shortly after your West Side development began construction. The building where they rented was demolished for the project. Elijah's fingers froze on the page. His project. His development. His displacement. The realization hit like a physical blow. He hadn't just failed to see her, he had actively, if unknowingly, contributed to her homelessness. "Where is she now?" he asked, voice tight. "Still looking, sir. She's proven elusive." Elijah closed the file, a strange weight settling in his chest. "Continue the search. Quietly. And cancel the reward, it's making her run." His team exchanged confused glances. "May I ask why this is so important, sir?" his assistant ventured. Elijah turned to the window, watching rain trace patterns down glass. "Because I need to see her," he said simply. "How many lives do we impact without realizing? The ripples we create just by existing in our privilege." In the warehouse, Iona packed her meager belongings. She couldn't stay here much longer. The searches were closing in, tightening like a noose around the industrial district. As she rolled her spare shirt into her backpack, something clattered to the floor, a small stone, perfectly smooth. The last one from her father's collection. She picked it up, feeling its weight in her palm. One stone. One last throw if needed. A noise outside froze her mid-motion. Footsteps. Voices. Check the warehouse next. Heat signatures showed something on the thermal scan. Iona's heart pounded as she slipped her backpack on, clutching the stone. No back exit. Windows too high. They'd find her this time. Unless. She moved silently to the warehouse office, a small elevated room with windows facing the main floor. As flashlight beams cut through cracks in the main entrance, she climbed onto the desk, pushing at the ceiling tiles. An attic space. Tight, dark, but possibly her only escape. As she pulled herself up, the ceiling groaned. Dust rained down. The warehouse doors burst open. Flashlights swept the space below. "Someone's been here," a voice called out. "Recently." Iona held her breath, pressed against wooden beams, praying the rotted ceiling would hold her weight. One wrong move, one sound. Below, footsteps approached the office. A flashlight beam swept upward. And that's when she saw it, a small hole in the warehouse roof, just beyond the attic space. Freedom, if she could reach it without being heard. She inched forward on ancient beams, each creak a thunderclap in her ears. The stone clutched in her hand like a talisman. Almost there. A beam splintered beneath her weight. Voices shouted below. And as Iona lunged for the opening, the ceiling gave way. She fell through air, time slowing to crystal clarity. Below, men looked up in shock. Above, night sky and freedom beckoned. In that suspended moment, Iona made her choice. She threw the stone, not at the men, but at the hanging light fixture to her right. Perfect aim. The warehouse plunged into darkness just as she crashed onto a stack of empty cardboard boxes. Confusion. Shouting. Flashlights swinging wildly. Iona rolled to her feet and ran, disappearing into the maze of crates and machinery. Behind her, a voice called into a radio, "Sir, we found her. Warehouse on 8th. She's here." And miles away, Elijah Cross's phone lit up with a message that would change everything. Target located. "But sir, there's something you should know. She's not alone. She's not alone." Elijah Cross stared at the message on his phone, the blue light illuminating his face in the darkened penthouse. Not alone. The words echoed in his mind as he set the device down on his marble countertop. He hadn't been alone either. Not technically. Surrounded by assistants, security teams, board members, investors, people who depended on his decisions, who executed his vision. Yet emptiness haunted the corners of his life, an ever-present shadow that no amount of success could dispel. "Bring the car around," he said into the intercom. "No security detail. Just the driver." "Sir." His assistant's voice crackled with concern. "After the attack. Now." The word left no room for argument. Elijah moved to his bedroom closet, larger than most apartments, and bypassed the tailored suits and designer shoes. Instead, he reached for jeans he rarely wore, a plain dark jacket, boots that wouldn't mark him as wealthy. Disguised as ordinary. As human. When was the last time he'd felt human? 5 years ago, perhaps. Before Cross Technologies became a unicorn startup. Before the IPO that made him a billionaire at 33. Before money transformed him from person to brand, from man to myth. The elevator descended 82 floors in perfect silence. Like his life, a smooth, controlled drop into isolation. He remembered the day everything changed. Standing on the balcony of his first luxury penthouse, champagne in hand, the city spread before him like a kingdom to conquer. A reporter had asked what it felt like to make it. "It feels like winning," he'd answered with practiced charm. But winning what? And at what cost? As his private car slipped through nighttime streets toward the warehouse district, Elijah closed his eyes, memories surfacing like debris after a storm. How many times had someone looked at you without seeing who you truly are? Left a comment about what you've posted this past week if you felt invisible before. 3 years earlier, he'd walked through the West Side neighborhood where his largest development now stood. Residents had lined the streets with signs, "Communities not corporations," and "People over profit." An elderly woman had approached him, her eyes clear and direct. "My family's lived here for 60 years. Where do you expect us to go?" He'd let his PR team answer. Something about relocation assistance, about progress and opportunity. Empty words to fill the space where compassion should have lived. The woman had looked right through him. "You're building towers on the graves of our memories." He'd dismissed her then. Dramatic, he'd thought. Unrealistic. Now he wondered if she'd been right. If Iona's mother had been one of those displaced by his vision of progress. If the stones Iona threw had been carved by the weight of what he'd taken from her. The car slowed as they approached the warehouse district. Flashing lights cut through darkness, police units, private security vehicles, all converging on a dilapidated building surrounded by chain-link fence. "Wait here," Elijah told his driver, stepping out into night air thick with tension. His security chief approached, surprise evident on his face. "Sir, you shouldn't be here. It's not secure." "You said she's not alone," Elijah replied, ignoring the warning. "Explain." The man hesitated. "We tracked her to this warehouse. But there are others. A small community of homeless. Maybe a dozen. They're protecting her." Elijah moved toward the warehouse, pain from his still-healing ribs a constant reminder of his vulnerability. Through gaps in the fence, he could see figures huddled near the entrance, security personnel negotiating with someone inside. "They're refusing to come out," his security chief continued. "They know about the reward. Think we'll arrest her." "Call them off," Elijah said. "Sir." "All of them. Police, security, everyone. Call them off." The security chief stared in disbelief. "We've been searching for days. She's right there." "And she's terrified," Elijah replied, something unfamiliar coloring his voice. "Empathy, perhaps. Call them off. Now." As the security chief reluctantly made calls, Elijah watched the warehouse. Somewhere inside, a woman who'd saved his life was hiding. A woman whose life he'd unknowingly helped destroy. Success without meaning, how many of us have traded connection for comfort? In his mind, memories continued to surface. The groundbreaking ceremony for Cross Tower 1. Champagne toasts and gold shovels piercing earth where families had lived for generations. The headlines praising his vision. The profiles lauding his business acumen. Not one had mentioned the displaced. The forgotten. The invisible. He'd built his empire on a foundation of willful blindness, seeing only opportunity where others saw community, history, home. What profit a man to gain the world and lose his soul? The words from his childhood Sunday school echoed unbidden. "They're pulling back," the security chief announced, returning to Elijah's side. "But sir, this doesn't make sense. Why go through all this effort to find her, only to walk away?" Elijah watched as vehicles began to withdraw, lights fading into the distance. "I'm not walking away." "Then what?" "I'm going in. Alone." Shock registered on the man's face. "That's not safe. These people have nothing to lose." "They could. They have everything to lose," Elijah corrected him. "Their dignity. Their community. Their trust. Things I never considered valuable until recently." He moved toward the fence, finding a gap where the chain link had been cut and bent back. "Sir, please. Go back to the car," Elijah ordered, his tone final. "If I'm not out in an hour, then you can worry." As his security team reluctantly withdrew, Elijah slipped through the fence, approaching the warehouse with slow, measured steps. No security. No entourage. No power beyond what his humanity might offer. At the entrance, a man stood guard, tall, gaunt, with eyes hardened by life on the streets. "They're gone," Elijah said, stopping several feet away. "The police, the security. All of them." The man didn't move. "And who are you?" Elijah hesitated. For the first time in years, the answer wasn't obvious. Not CEO. Not billionaire. Not even victim. "My name is Elijah Cross," he said simply. "And I need to speak with Iona." Recognition dawned in the man's eyes, followed by suspicion, then something harder to read. Why? The question hung between them, heavier than it should have been. Why indeed? To thank her? To ease his guilt? To satisfy his curiosity? "Because," Elijah said finally, "I need to see her. Really see her. The way she saw me." The man studied him for a long moment. Then, without a word, he turned and disappeared into the darkness of the warehouse. Elijah waited, heart pounding with an unfamiliar rhythm. Fear. Hope. Redemption. Minutes stretched like hours until finally, a figure emerged from the shadows. Not the man. Not Iona. A small child, maybe 6 years old, with wide eyes and tangled hair. In her outstretched hand, she held a single stone. "She said to give you this," the child whispered. "She said you'd understand." Elijah took the stone, its surface smooth against his palm. Carved on one side was a single word, invisible. And in that moment, Elijah Cross, who owned half the skyline but none of its humanity, made a decision that would change everything. He would find Iona Mills himself. No security. No reward. No cameras. Just a man seeking redemption from a woman who had seen him at his most vulnerable, and who deserved to be seen in return. 7 nights. 7 attempts to find her. Elijah clutched the stone with invisible carved into its surface as he walked through the rain-soaked streets of downtown. No driver tonight. No security. Just a man in a plain jacket, jeans worn enough to pass as ordinary, and boots that had never seen real work until this week. The diner stood on the corner of West Side and Pine, a 24-hour establishment with flickering neon and windows fogged with steam from the grill. Lou's Diner, the place where his security team had tracked Iona working before his call-off order. He pushed open the door, the bell announcing his entrance. 3 a.m., yet half the booths were filled, night shift workers, insomniacs, people with nowhere else to go. No one looked up. No one recognized the billionaire in their midst. The sensation was both foreign and strangely freeing. Elijah took a booth by the window, eyes scanning for her. The waitress who approached wasn't Iona, but a tired woman in her 50s. "Coffee," he said simply. She poured without comment, then gestured toward the kitchen. "She's in back. Said you might come." Elijah's pulse quickened. "She's here." The waitress studied him with narrowed eyes. "Finish your coffee first. Give her time to decide if she wants to be found." Have you ever waited for a moment that could change everything? That space between breathing in and breathing out, where your whole life hangs in the balance. 15 minutes passed. Then 20. The coffee grew cold. Outside, the rain intensified, drumming against glass like nervous fingers. When the kitchen door finally swung open, Elijah almost didn't recognize her. Iona wore no uniform now. Just jeans and a faded flannel shirt, hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. She carried a pot of fresh coffee and a plate with pie. Without a word, she set both on his table and slid into the booth across from him. "You're persistent," she said finally, her voice different than he remembered, steadier, less afraid. "Most rich men give up after the first no. I'm not most rich men." "Yes, you are." She pushed the pie toward him. "Apple." Kitchen was going to throw it out. Elijah looked down at the dessert, slightly burned around the edges, imperfect in a way nothing in his life was allowed to be. "Why did you save me?" he asked, the question that had consumed him for days. Iona's fingers tapped a rhythm on the table, her eyes never leaving his face. "Why did you build your tower where my mother and I lived?" The question hit like a physical blow. No pretense. No polite evasion. "Business," he answered automatically, then winced at how hollow it sounded. "I never knew." "Of course you didn't." She cut him off. "You don't need to know the ants when you're moving mountains." The silence that followed was heavy, charged with the weight of two worlds that were never meant to intersect. "I came to thank you," Elijah said finally, reaching for words that seemed inadequate. "And to apologize." "For what specifically?" Iona asked, her voice cool. "For not seeing me when I cleaned your hotel room? For building luxury condos where families had homes? Or for sending an army to hunt me down like I was some kind of trophy?" Outside, lightning flashed, illuminating her face, beautiful in its fierce dignity, unbroken despite everything. "When was the last time someone spoke truth to you without fear? Comment if you believe the most honest words come from those with nothing left to lose." "All of it," he said simply. Something in his tone made her pause. She studied him, really looked at him, perhaps for the first time. "You're different than you were in the alley," she observed. "Near-death experiences tend to change people." "No," Iona shook her head. "Near-life experiences do." She reached across the table and took back the stone he still held. "You kept it. It seemed important." "My father taught me to throw," she said, unexpected vulnerability softening her voice. "Said stones don't care how rich or poor you are. They only care about intention." "What happened to him?" Elijah asked. "Life happened. The system happened." She shrugged, the motion carrying years of practiced indifference. "One day he was teaching me to throw, the next he was gone. Men disappear in my world, Mr. Cross. They don't get rescued by stone-throwing heroes." A cook called from the kitchen. Iona stood, conversation apparently over. "Same time tomorrow?" Elijah asked, surprising himself with the question. She paused, considering him. "Why?" The answer that came wasn't calculated or rehearsed. "Because I want to see you. Not the maid. Not the hero. You." Iona's laugh held no humor. "Careful what you wish for, billionaire. You might not like what you see. But the next night, she was there, same booth, same time. And the night after that. And after that. Their conversations began cautiously. Formal exchanges that gradually evolved into something more authentic. He learned about her mother's death, her struggles to find work without an address, the community of forgotten people who protected each other when no one else would. She learned about his lonely childhood in boarding schools, the father who measured love in achievements, the emptiness that success had never filled. You have everything, she said during their fourth meeting, picking at a plate of fries they shared. Why does it feel like you have nothing? The question pierced something in Elijah that he'd never examined. Maybe because things aren't the same as meaning. On the fifth night, he brought her a book. Her offhand mention that she missed reading had stayed with him. Nothing expensive, just a paperback she'd once loved and lost when they'd been evicted. She'd accepted it with suspicion that melted into something softer when she opened the cover. On the sixth night, she brought him a stone. Smooth, ordinary, but chosen specifically. For what? He asked. Protection, she'd answered. Everyone needs something solid to hold on to. By the seventh night, something had shifted between them. Not friendship exactly, but understanding. A bridge forming between worlds that should never have met. The diner had become their neutral territory, neither his world of penthouses and boardrooms nor her world of shelters and survival. Just a small, brightly lit island in the darkness where they could exist as equals. You never answered my question, Elijah said as rain streamed down the windows. Why did you save me that night? Iona was quiet for a long moment, tracing patterns in the condensation on her water glass. Because, she said finally, for a second, you weren't a billionaire. You were just a man bleeding on concrete. And I was just someone who could help. That's simple. Nothing's ever simple. She met his eyes directly. But in that moment, we were both just human. Something electric passed between them, recognition deeper than words, more honest than any conversation they'd had. Elijah reached across the table, his hand stopping just short of hers. An invitation, not a demand. Iona looked at his outstretched fingers, hesitation written in every line of her body. Then, slowly, she reached back. Their fingertips had just touched when the diner door burst open. 3 men entered, soaked from the rain, faces hidden by hoods. One pointed directly at their booth. That's her, he said, voice familiar in a way that sent ice through Elijah's veins. The stone bitch from the alley. Their eyes met across the table, Iona's wide with recognition, Elijah's with dawning horror. The leader pulled back his hood, revealing a face with a long scar down one cheek. The man from the attack. The one who'd gotten away. Looks like we found 2 birds with 1 stone, he said, pulling something from his jacket pocket. Metal glinted under fluorescent lights. And in that moment of terror, Iona's hand closed fully around Elijah's, not for protection, but in protective instinct. The gesture stunned them both more than the danger before them. The knife clattered to the floor as the scarred man crumpled, his nose broken from the coffee pot Iona had thrown with perfect accuracy. His friends backed toward the door, suddenly unsure without their leader's bravado. Next one goes through your eye, Iona said, already holding a heavy salt shaker like a stone. Try me. They fled, dragging their moaning friend behind them. The entire diner had frozen, the night cook peering through the service window, waitresses pressed against walls, customers halfway between sitting and standing. Only Elijah remained perfectly still, studying Iona with new understanding. She hadn't just saved him again. She'd chosen him, her hand still gripping his across the table in protective instinct. You can't go back to the warehouse, he said quietly as police sirens wailed in the distance. They'll find you there. Iona released his hand, the moment of connection broken. I've been found before. I'll disappear again. Or, Elijah said, something shifting in his expression, you could come with me. Her eyes narrowed with immediate suspicion. Where? Somewhere safe. Temporary. Just until things settle. She laughed, the sound sharp with disbelief. Your penthouse. Your mansion. No thanks. Not charity, he clarified, sensing her pride. A job. The sirens grew louder. Outside, red and blue lights painted the wet pavement. What kind of job? Iona asked, already calculating escape routes. The kind where you don't have to run anymore. Have you ever had to trust someone you have every reason to doubt? That moment when the devil you know feels safer than the angel you don't. 20 minutes later, they sat in the back of Elijah's car, not the ostentatious luxury vehicle she'd expected, but a simple black sedan with tinted windows. The driver asked no questions about the commotion at the diner or the woman now sitting beside his employer. I need someone to manage my household, Elijah explained as city lights streaked past the windows. Someone who notices things others miss. A maid, Iona translated flatly. You want me to clean for you? A house manager, he corrected. Private quarters, salary, benefits. Security from those thugs. And what do you get? Her voice was careful, controlled. Rich men don't hire homeless women to run their homes without wanting something. The car slowed at a security gate, then proceeded up a winding driveway toward a house that seemed to glow from within, all glass and warm light against the darkness. Not a penthouse downtown, but a modernist mansion nestled in hills overlooking the city. Maybe I get peace of mind, Elijah answered finally. Maybe I get to sleep without seeing your face in my dreams, wondering if you're safe or if those men found you first. The raw honesty in his voice surprised them both. They rode the rest of the way in silence, tension humming between them. When the car stopped at the entrance, Iona didn't immediately get out. 1 week, she said. Then I decide. 1 week, he agreed. The house was nothing like she'd imagined. No cold marble or pretentious artwork. Instead, warm woods, comfortable furniture, walls of glass that erased boundaries between inside and out. A home designed for someone who wanted to see the world, not hide from it. A housekeeper, an older woman with kind eyes, showed Iona to her quarters, which turned out to be an entire guest wing with a bedroom larger than any apartment she'd ever had. Bathrooms through there, the woman explained. Closets been stocked with basics in your size. Kitchen's always open. Mr. Cross gives staff full access to the house except his private office. When the woman left, Iona stood frozen in the center of the room, overwhelmed. The bed looked impossibly soft, the carpet thick beneath her worn shoes. The silence was absolute, no traffic noise, no voices, no danger. She moved to the window, looking out at city lights spread below like fallen stars. Somewhere down there were the streets she'd called home, the people she'd left behind, the life she'd learned to survive. Up here was, what exactly? Safety. Opportunity. Trap. She slept on the floor that first night, back pressed against the wall, a decorative paperweight clutched in her hand like a stone. By morning, she'd scouted every exit, catalogued potential weapons, memorized the security system's patterns. By afternoon, she knew the house staff's names, schedules, and which ones watched her with curiosity versus suspicion. By evening, she'd found 7 smooth stones in the Japanese garden and hidden them throughout her room. When Elijah found her there 3 days later, arranging stones along the windowsill, he didn't comment on the habit. Just invited her to dinner, not in the formal dining room, but in the kitchen, where he was cooking himself. You cook? She asked, watching him chop vegetables with surprising competence. Stress relief, he explained. Boards and investors are exhausting. Poor billionaire, she mocked gently. Such difficult problems. But there was less bite in her words now. The harsh edges between them had begun to soften through proximity, through the strange intimacy of shared space. Over simple pasta and wine she barely touched, they talked, really talked, for the first time without the diner's fluorescent glare or the pressure of limited time. Why did you really bring me here? she asked, the question that had haunted her for days. Elijah considered, twirling pasta thoughtfully. Because you're the first person in years who sees me instead of what I represent. You could buy that kind of authenticity with your pocket change. No, he shook his head. You can't buy what you gave freely in that alley. Compassion without agenda. I haven't experienced that since. Since before the money. Before cross technologies. Before I became a brand instead of a person. Sometimes we're one opportunity away from changing someone's life. Who are you walking past today? The days unfolded in unexpected rhythm. Iona adapted to luxury with cautious acceptance, like a wild animal gradually trusting a gentle hand. The floor became a bed, the paperweight returned to its place. But the stones remained by her window, a talisman against comfort's seduction. She didn't just manage the house, she transformed it. Rearranged systems with efficient precision. Solved problems before they became problems. Saw everything, fixed everything, controlled everything she could. It gives you power, Elijah observed one evening, finding her reorganizing his kitchen after midnight. Controlling the environment. When you've had nothing, she replied without looking up, control is everything. Their conversations deepened with each passing day. She told him about the shelter community, their secret support systems, the invisible economy of survival. He shared the loneliness of success, the emptiness of achievement without purpose, the prison of others' expectations. One night, during a rare thunderstorm, power failed throughout the hillside. Iona found Elijah on the terrace, face turned toward the storm, lightning illuminating him in flashes. Not afraid of getting struck, she asked, joining him at the railing. Oddly, no. Rain dampened his hair, his shoulders. After the alley, ordinary danger feels refreshing. Ordinary, she echoed with bitter amusement. That's the difference between us, Elijah. Your ordinary danger was my Tuesday night for 2 years. He turned to her, really looked at her, rain streaming down her face, defiance in her stance. I can never understand that, he admitted. But I'm trying to see it. To see you. Something shifted between them in that moment, vulnerability recognized, barriers lowered just enough to glimpse what lay beyond. My week's up tomorrow, Iona said quietly. Stay. The word hung between them, simple yet weighted with implication. Not as staff. Not as charity. Then as what? Lightning flashed, illuminating uncertainty in his eyes. As someone I need in my life. Someone who reminds me what matters. Iona's breath caught. That's not a job description. No, he agreed. It's not. The rain intensified, but neither moved to seek shelter. Two figures silhouetted against the storm, the distance between them both vast and infinitesimal. I'll think about it, she finally said. Later that night, Iona stood at her bedroom window, fingering the smooth stones along the sill. 1 week had stretched her understanding of the world, of herself, of the man whose life she'd saved. She'd begun to see beyond the billionaire to the lonely boy who'd built fortresses of wealth to protect himself from emptiness. She'd begun to imagine a life beyond survival, beyond invisibility. It terrified her. As dawn broke, Iona made her decision. She placed the stones in her pocket, packed her few belongings, and moved quietly through the silent house toward Elijah's private office, the one room she'd never entered. The door was unlocked. Inside, moonlight illuminated a space more revealing than any conversation. One wall displayed architectural models, past and future cross-developments. On his desk lay folders, one open to reveal blueprints. Iona stepped closer, something cold settling in her stomach as she recognized the location. The South Side District. Her old neighborhood. The last untouched area where her homeless community still found shelter. The project name glowed in embossed letters across the top, Southside Renaissance. Below it, a signature. Elijah's. Dated yesterday. Betrayal tastes like copper, like blood on your tongue when you've been struck by someone you trusted not to hit you. Iona stared at the blueprints, her fingertips hovering over familiar street names. Carter Avenue. Willow Street. The community center where she'd found shelter during winter storms. The abandoned church where families with children slept in the basement. The entire South Side district, the last place in the city where people like her could exist without persecution. All of it marked for demolition. All of it signed away by Elijah's hand. She didn't hear him enter the office behind her. Didn't notice his presence until he spoke. You shouldn't be in here. Iona turned slowly, the blueprint crinkling in her trembling hands. And you shouldn't be doing this. Elijah's eyes moved from her face to the documents, realization dawning. He stepped forward, reaching for the papers. Let me explain. Explain what? Her voice was dangerously quiet. How you sat across from me night after night talking about change and meaning while signing away the last homes my friends have. While planning to bulldoze the only safe places left for people you claim to suddenly care about. The silence between them vibrated with betrayal. Outside, dawn painted the sky in colors neither noticed. Have you ever trusted someone who showed you only the parts of themselves they wanted you to see? Type, trust broken, if you felt this knife twist of discovery. It's complicated, Elijah finally said, the words landing like stones between them. Iona laughed, a hollow sound that echoed off glass walls. No, it's actually very simple. This, she shook the blueprint, this is who you are. The conversations, the connection, the job offer, that was the costume you put on to feel better about yourself. That's not true. Elijah's voice hardened. The project was in motion before I ever met you. Before the alley. Contracts signed, permits filed. And after? She stepped closer, eyes burning with accusation. After you met me? After I told you about the people who live there? After I explained how development projects like yours have been systematically erasing people like me from existence? His silence was answer enough. You did nothing to stop it, she whispered, the truth settling like ash on her tongue. You could have stopped it with one phone call. Elijah looked away, unable to meet her gaze. It's not that simple. Investors, commitments, hundreds of millions already invested. People's lives. Iona slammed the blueprint down on his desk, voice rising for the first time. Not numbers on a balance sheet. Not unfortunate casualties of progress. Real people with nowhere else to go. We have relocation assistance programs. To where? The question hung between them like a dropped weapon. To which shelters that are already overcrowded? To which neighborhoods that haven't already been gentrified out of reach? Where exactly should people go when every door is closed and every bridge is guarded? When was the last time someone made you question your comfortable certainties? The moment you realized your convenience might be someone else's catastrophe. Elijah moved to the wall of windows, looking out at the city he helped reshape, glass towers gleaming in morning light, construction cranes dotting the skyline like mechanical birds. His city. His vision. I'm trying, he said finally, voice softer. To understand. To change. No. Iona shook her head. You're trying to feel better about choices you've already made. There's a difference. She gathered her backpack from where she'd dropped it by the door, slinging it over one shoulder. The stones in her pocket clinked together, a small, hard reminder of everything she'd survived before him. I was starting to believe in you, she admitted, pain threading through her words. Starting to think maybe there was a human being under all that money and power. Someone who could actually see the world they were breaking. Elijah turned back to her, something desperate in his expression. I do see it now. Because of you. But you're not changing it. The simplicity of her observation cut deeper than anger could have. Seeing without action is just another form of tourism in other people's pain. He crossed the room, stopping just short of reaching for her. Stay. Help me understand how to fix this. It's not my job to teach you humanity, Elijah. The use of his name, intimate, deliberate, made the distance between them feel suddenly vast. Not employer and employee. Not savior and saved. Just two people from worlds that could never truly align. Then why did you save me in that alley? He demanded, frustration breaking through his controlled facade. Why bother if I'm beyond redemption? Iona paused at the door, considering the question with genuine reflection. Because that night, you were just a person who needed help. Not a system. Not a corporation. Just a human being bleeding on concrete. Her hand rested on the doorknob, a line about to be crossed. But this, she gestured to the blueprint, this isn't you bleeding. This is you choosing to make others bleed while keeping your hands clean. Where will you go? Elijah asked, something like fear threading through his voice. Back to being invisible, she answered simply. It was safer there anyway. As Iona turned to leave, Elijah made one final attempt. I'll double the relocation assistance. Triple it. Whatever it takes. She stopped, shoulders stiffening. When she turned back, her eyes held something worse than anger, disappointment. You still don't get it, she said quietly. You think throwing money solves the problem. But money is the problem. Your money. Your power. Your ability to decide who deserves space in this city and who doesn't. The truth of her words hit him like physical blows, each one landing with precision she'd once reserved for stones. Then tell me what to do, he pleaded, something breaking in his voice. Tell me how to fix this. Iona looked at him, really looked at him, seeing both the man she'd glimpsed during their late-night conversations and the system he represented. Both real. Both true. Some things can't be fixed with a checkbook or a charity gala, Elijah. Some damage goes too deep. She pulled a stone from her pocket, the one she'd carried the longest, a smooth river rock worn to perfect balance. You have to decide which matters more, your empire or your soul. She placed the stone on his desk, a small monument to everything said and unsaid between them. Goodbye, Elijah. The door closed behind her with quiet finality. Have we become so comfortable with systems that hurt others that we stop seeing the pain as a choice we're making? Elijah stood alone in his office, morning light streaming through windows that suddenly felt like walls. He picked up the stone she'd left, cool against his palm, heavy with meaning he was only beginning to understand. His phone buzzed. Messages accumulated, board members confirming the Southside development, investors congratulating the final approval, PR teams crafting announcements about urban renewal and revitalization. The language of progress stripped bare now, revealed as the language of erasure. He moved to his desk, fingers hovering over the blueprint that had shattered whatever had been growing between him and Iona. The signature, his signature, black ink on white paper, authority made visible. For the first time, he saw his name as others might see it, not as achievement or success, but as threat. As destruction given legal form. The phone continued buzzing. The world continued turning. The system he'd helped build continued grinding forward with mechanical indifference to individual suffering. And Elijah Cross, who owned half the skyline but had just lost something infinitely more valuable, realized with stunning clarity that his empire and his soul might be mutually exclusive possessions. He couldn't keep both. As dawn broke fully over the city, he made a call. Not to his board or his investors or his PR team, but to the one person who might still help him find his way back to humanity. The phone rang unanswered in an empty warehouse where Iona had once slept. Where others still slept. Where bulldozers would arrive in exactly 48 hours. Too late, he realized what he'd truly lost wasn't just Iona's presence, but his last chance at redemption. Unless the Cross Industries board unanimously rejects your proposal to halt the Southside development. Elijah stood at the head of the conference table, 12 faces staring back at him with expressions ranging from confusion to open hostility. The chairman's words hung in the air like a corporate execution order. "This project has been in development for 3 years, the CFO added, glasses flashing under overhead lights. Permits secured, contracts signed, $340 million already committed. You can't just cancel it because you've had some personal epiphany." The word dripped with condescension. Across the table, board members exchanged knowing glances. Their golden boy had lost his edge. Gone soft. Become a liability. "I'm not asking permission," Elijah said, his voice steady despite the hammering in his chest. "I'm informing you of my decision. The project stops now." The chairman leaned forward, voice lowered to a dangerous register. "May I remind you that while you're the face of this company, you answer to this board. We can replace you. We will replace you. Then do it." Elijah placed a folder on the table, legal documents prepared overnight. "But the development still stops. I'm exercising my founder's veto." Chaos erupted around him, voices raised in outrage, legal counsel frantically flipping through bylaws, threats and ultimatums flying across polished mahogany. Elijah heard none of it. His mind was across town, in the South Side district, where Iona had disappeared like smoke. 3 days of searching, 3 days of nothing. But tonight, the bulldozers would arrive. Have you ever stood alone against a system you helped create? That moment when doing the right thing means burning the bridges that brought you success. Across the city, in the shadows of the South Side district, Iona crouched in the broken-windowed shell of what had once been a corner market. Rain poured through holes in the roof, forming puddles on cracked linoleum. The building was scheduled for demolition at dawn. Just like everything else that had sheltered her. She'd spread the word throughout the homeless community: evacuation, immediate, non-negotiable. Most had already fled to uncertain refuges in other parts of the city. Only a few remained, gathering what little they owned before the machines arrived. Among them, an elderly man who'd once been a professor before mental illness took his career, his family, his home. He sat beside Iona now, clutching a garbage bag containing his life's remains. "Where will we go?" he asked, voice trembling. Iona had no answer that wouldn't taste like a lie. Instead, she reached into her pocket, finding the smooth outline of her last stone, the only one she hadn't left with Elijah. A talisman of survival when survival seemed impossible. "We'll find somewhere," she said finally. "We always do." But her voice lacked conviction. The city was running out of shadows dark enough to hide in. Running out of spaces the wealthy hadn't claimed for their glass towers and boutique coffee shops. A noise outside froze them both: engines, voices. Too early for the demolition crews. Iona moved to the broken window, peering through jagged glass. 3 men stood in the rain-soaked street, flashlight beams cutting through darkness. One had a scar running down his cheek. Her heart stopped. The men from the alley. The ones who'd attacked Elijah. The ones who'd found them at the diner. Well, the scarred man called out, his voice carrying through the empty building. "Looks like the stone bitch is hiding right where we thought she'd be." Have you ever felt the moment when past mistakes return to collect their debt? When the shadows you thought you'd outrun find you anyway? Back in the gleaming tower of Cross Industries, Elijah fought for something larger than himself for the first time in his life. "You can remove me as CEO," he said, addressing the stunned board members. "But I still own controlling interest in the land parcels. And I'm converting them to a community land trust, effective immediately." The company lawyer stood, face flushed with anger. "You can't do that unilaterally." "I already have." Elijah tossed another document on the table. "Signed and filed this morning." The chairman's voice turned to ice. "You've just committed corporate suicide, Elijah. Everything you've built." "No," Elijah cut him off, a strange calm settling over him. I'm finally building something worth preserving. He walked out of the boardroom, ignoring the chaos erupting behind him. In the elevator, his phone buzzed with a text from his private investigator, possible sighting. Southside District. Miller and 4th. Come now. Iona. As the elevator descended 82 floors, Elijah Cross made peace with what he was losing: power, position, billions in personal wealth. And recognized what he might still save. In the abandoned market, Iona pushed the elderly professor toward a back exit. Run, she whispered urgently. Find the others. Warn them. Outside, flashlight beams swept closer. The men had split up, surrounding the building. What about you? The old man asked, clutching his garbage bag of possessions. I'll be right behind you, she lied, knowing someone needed to stay behind to give him time. Go. Once alone, Iona pressed her back against a crumbling wall, mind racing through options. No stones except the one in her pocket. No weapons except her wits. No escape except through men who'd waited weeks for revenge. The front door splintered under a heavy boot. Come out, the scarred man taunted, flashlight beam dancing across broken shelves. No billionaire boyfriend to save you this time. Iona closed her eyes, gathering courage from somewhere deeper than fear. When she opened them again, she was already moving, diving behind a fallen display case as the flashlight found where she'd been standing. There she is, one shouted. The hunt began in earnest now, 3 predators tracking a prey they'd underestimated once before. They moved with vicious purpose, blocking exits, appending shelters, closing in with the patience of men who enjoyed fear. Iona stayed low, silent, circling away from their advance. But the building offered few hiding places, and fewer escape routes. When the scarred man finally cornered her in what had once been the store's back office, his smile gleamed in the darkness. Found you, he whispered, raising something that glinted metallically in the dim light. Been thinking about this moment for weeks. Iona's hand closed around her last stone, knowing it wouldn't be enough. Not against a knife. Not against hatred. But she would not die cowering. You should have kept running, she said, rising to her full height, stone ready in her palm. The man laughed, a sound like gravel under tires. Brave. Stupid, but brave. He lunged forward just as headlights flooded the room from outside, momentarily blinding them both. The screech of tires, a car door slamming. Get away from her. The voice froze everyone in place. Standing in the doorway was Elijah Cross, not the polished CEO in tailored suits, but a man in jeans and a rain-soaked jacket. No security team. No driver. Just one man against 3. Well, ain't this perfect, the scarred man drawled, turning from Iona to his new target. 2 birds, 1 knife. What would you risk for someone who walked away from you? Is redemption found in grand gestures or in simply showing up when it matters most? What happened next unfolded in heartbeats. The man lunged at Elijah, knife slashing through air. Elijah sidestepped, not fast enough to avoid the blade completely. It caught his arm, drawing a line of dark red across his sleeve. But instead of retreating, Elijah charged forward, tackling the scarred man with reckless abandon. They crashed into a shelving unit, sending it toppling. The knife skittered away across dirty linoleum. The other 2 men rushed in, fists and boots finding Elijah's ribs, his back, his face. He curled inward, protecting vital areas, but made no move to escape. Iona watched in horror as the man who owned skyscrapers endured a beating he couldn't possibly win, all to give her time to run. The realization struck her like lightning. He wasn't fighting to win. He was sacrificing himself for her. Just as she had once done for him. The symmetry of it, the perfect, terrible balance, awakened something primal in Iona. She looked down at the stone in her hand, then at the fallen knife just feet away. Choice crystallized in a single moment of clarity. Her throw was perfect, the stone hitting the scarred man's temple with enough force to drop him instantly. As the others turned in shock, Iona was already moving, scooping up the knife, placing herself between Elijah's bloodied form and his attackers. "Next one dies," she said simply, the knife steady in her hand. The men looked from their unconscious leader to the woman whose eyes promised fulfillment of her threat. Something in her stance, something feral, unbreakable, made them believe her. They ran, disappearing into the rainy night, leaving their fallen comrade behind. In the sudden silence, Iona dropped to her knees beside Elijah, who struggled to sit up despite blood streaming from a cut above his eye. The same place he'd been bleeding when they first met. "Why?" she demanded, helping him lean against the wall. "Why would you come here alone? Why would you risk?" "I stopped the development," he interrupted, words slurring slightly through swelling lips. "All of it. The board's removing me as CEO, but it doesn't matter. I transferred the land to a community trust. They can't touch it now." Iona's hands, checking his injuries, went still. "You did what? It's yours now. All of it." "Well, not yours specifically. The community's." He attempted a smile that turned into a wince. Seemed like the only way to fix what couldn't be fixed. Blood dripped between them, pooling on concrete, his blood this time, not hers. Roles reversed, worlds inverted. "You didn't have to do this," she whispered, tearing a strip from her shirt to press against his bleeding arm. "Yes," he said quietly, his eyes finding hers with painful clarity. "I did." As sirens wailed in the distance, someone must have called police during the fight. Iona and Elijah sat together in the ruins of what had almost been destroyed, both bleeding, both changed. "I was wrong about you," she admitted, the words difficult but necessary. "No," Elijah shook his head slowly. "You were right. I just needed time to see it myself." The sirens grew closer. Red and blue lights began to flash against broken windows. Soon, there would be questions, statements, the machinery of a system that treated them differently despite their shared humanity. But in this moment, something profound passed between them, understanding deeper than words, connection forged in blood and sacrifice. As Elijah's consciousness began to fade, he reached for her hand, fingers weakly curling around hers. "Don't disappear again," he whispered. "Please." Before Iona could answer, his eyes closed, his head slumping against her shoulder just as police officers burst through the door, weapons drawn, flashlight beams catching them in a tableau of violence and tenderness. "Hands where we can see them," an officer shouted. And as Iona raised her blood-stained hands, still cradling the unconscious billionaire against her chest, she realized with sudden, perfect clarity that neither of them could go back to the people they had been. The only question was, who would they become instead? Disgraced CEO Elijah Cross donates $500 million to homeless initiative. The headline flashed across television screens 3 months after the night that changed everything. Iona switched off the TV in Elijah's hospital room, where he sat reviewing documents despite doctors' orders to rest. "Disgraced," he repeated with a wry smile. "That's one word for it." His recovery had been slower than either expected. 3 broken ribs. Internal bleeding. Surgery to repair a damaged kidney. The beating had nearly killed him, would have, if police hadn't arrived when they did. "You prefer, fallen billionaire?" Iona asked, taking the papers from his hands. "Or, corporate rebel? The business channels can't decide if you're having a breakdown or a breakthrough." Elijah leaned back against pillows, studying the woman who hadn't left his side since that night. Not as a caretaker or obligation, but as something neither could yet define. "What about you?" he asked. "Ready for tomorrow?" Tomorrow. The word hung between them, electric with possibility and fear. Because tomorrow, the first phase of what they now called Stonehaven would break ground, not luxury condos rising from the ashes of a community, but something entirely new. Something revolutionary. "I still think you're crazy," Iona said, but there was no bite in her words. Only wonder. Have you ever witnessed someone transform their greatest mistake into their greatest purpose? The moment when failure becomes foundation instead of ending. 4 floors below Elijah's private room, in a hospital conference center commandeered as temporary headquarters, 30 formerly homeless residents sat in a circle, architects, social workers, and city planners interspersed among them. At the head of the table stood a tall man with kind eyes who had once been a professor before mental illness took everything. Next item, he called out, confidence growing with each meeting. Childcare facilities at Stonehaven. Iona recommended 3 rooms, but I believe we need 5 based on current community needs. Voices rose in discussion, not charity recipients grateful for crumbs, but stakeholders designing their own future. Partners, not projects. This was the heart of what Elijah had surrendered everything to create. Not buildings he controlled, but spaces the community shaped for themselves. The transformation had begun the day he left the hospital after that first surgery. With Iona's guidance, he'd liquidated personal assets worth billions, vacation properties, art collections, private jets, stock portfolios. The board had removed him as CEO, as promised. The business press had declared him unstable. But from the ashes of his empire, something authentic was rising. The Community Land Trust is officially funded for 99 years, Elijah said, showing Iona the document he'd been reviewing. No corporation, including whatever remains of mine, can touch that land. Ever. Iona took the paper, her hands steadier than they once had been. The last 3 months had changed her too, not just in obvious ways like the apartment she now called home or the position she held as Stonehaven's development director. The change ran deeper. She no longer carried stones in her pockets. No longer slept with her back to the wall. Does it scare you? She asked quietly. Losing everything you built? Elijah considered the question with genuine reflection. I didn't lose everything, he finally answered. I just discovered what actually mattered. Outside the window, spring sunlight bathed the city in golden light. The same skyline, but viewed through new eyes by both of them. When was the last time you completely reimagined your definition of success? The moment you realized your legacy isn't what you own but what you change. The Stonehaven project had evolved beyond either of their original visions. What began as affordable housing had expanded to include healthcare facilities, job training centers, transitional support services, and community-owned businesses. Not charity, but opportunity. Not handouts, but hands joined. Most revolutionary of all was the ownership structure. Residents would earn equity through sweat equity, community service, and nominal rent payments calibrated to income. After 5 years, they'd own their spaces outright, breaking the cycle of permanent poverty that traditional assistance programs perpetuated. The business world called it foolish. Unsustainable. Elijah Cross's final fall from grace. But in the Southside community, people called it home. The construction team wants you there tomorrow, Iona said, returning to practical matters. The cameras too, though I know you hate that part. Elijah made a face. Can't you handle the press? You're better at it anyway. It was true. While Elijah had provided the resources and business acumen, Iona had become Stonehaven's public face, articulate, authentic, uncompromising. Her journey from invisible maid to community leader had inspired others to step forward, to believe transformation possible. They don't want me, she said with a small smile. They want the billionaire who gave everything away. Better optics. Former billionaire, he corrected. Current, what exactly am I now? The question contained layers neither was ready to fully examine. Their relationship had evolved beyond savior and saved, beyond employer and employee. They'd become partners in the purest sense, equals united by shared purpose rather than attraction or convenience. Yet something else simmered beneath the surface. Something neither acknowledged directly. Change begins when someone cares enough to stay. Share this if you believe in second chances. The next morning, cameras flashed as Elijah stood at a podium erected on vacant land that had nearly become luxury condominiums. Instead of a business suit, he wore jeans and a simple button-down. Instead of corporate executives flanking him, community members stood proud and straight-backed. Iona watched from the side, studying the man who had lost an empire but found his humanity. The transformation in him went beyond wealth or status. It showed in how he listened more than spoke, how he deferred to community wisdom rather than imposing his vision. "Today, we're not breaking ground on buildings," Elijah said into the microphone, voice steady despite the pain still lingering in his healing body. "We're breaking ground on a new approach to community development. One where those most affected have the most say." He gestured to where Iona stood. "None of this would exist without the courage of someone who refused to let me look away from what mattered. Someone who threw stones to save lives, not just mine in an alley, but an entire community threatened by the very systems I helped create." The crowd murmured, cameras swiveling to capture Iona's reaction. She maintained her composure, but something tightened in her chest at the public acknowledgement. "Stonehaven isn't charity," Elijah continued. "It's justice. It's restoration. And most importantly, it's just the beginning." The ceremonial first shovel pierced earth to applause and cheers. As the crowd moved toward the refreshment tables, Iona found herself face to face with Elijah for the first time that day. "Nice speech," she said. "I meant every word." His eyes held hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Especially about beginnings." The moment stretched between them, weighted with possibility neither was ready to name. Then a reporter approached, breaking the spell, asking questions about next phases and timelines. Later that evening, after the crowds had dispersed and only construction equipment remained on the site, Iona returned alone. The sunset painted everything in shades of gold and promise. She walked the perimeter slowly, trying to see the future rising from empty ground. Here would stand homes for families who'd slept in cars and shelters. There would rise a clinic offering healthcare to those the system had failed. Beyond would grow gardens to feed bodies and spirits long denied nourishment. All of it born from stones thrown in darkness, first to save a man's life, then to wake his conscience. As darkness fell, headlights approached. Elijah's car, but not his usual driver. He stepped out himself, moving with the careful deliberation of someone still healing. "I thought I might find you here," he said, coming to stand beside her. "Just making sure it's real," Iona admitted. They stood in companionable silence, shoulders not quite touching, watching stars emerge above what would soon become hope made tangible. "What happens after?" Elijah asked suddenly. "After what?" "After Stonehaven is built. After the community takes ownership. After our work here is done." He turned to face her directly. "What happens to us?" The question hung between them, honest, vulnerable, terrifying in its implications. "I don't know," Iona answered truthfully, meeting his gaze. "I've never planned beyond survival before." "Neither have I," he confessed. "Just in different ways." As moonlight bathed the empty lot in silver promise, they stood at the precipice of a question larger than either had dared contemplate. Could two people from worlds never meant to intersect build something that survived beyond the bridge that had brought them together? Or would completion of Stonehaven mark the end of whatever connection had grown between Stonethrower and Target, Savior and Saved, worlds briefly but powerfully aligned? Before either could speak again, Iona's phone rang, the community council with an urgent question about tomorrow's permits. As she stepped away to take the call, Elijah watched her silhouette against the darkening sky, and made a silent promise to himself. This time, he wouldn't let her disappear. No matter what came next. 1 year later, Stonehaven stood complete, not just buildings risen from empty ground, but a community reborn from its own ashes. The ribbon-cutting ceremony drew crowds that spilled across newly paved streets. Residents in their best clothes stood proudly beside city officials, media crews, and curious onlookers. Children darted between adults' legs, their laughter a soundtrack to celebration. At the center of it all stood Iona, dressed in a simple blue dress, her hair styled in natural curls rather than the severe ponytail of her maid days. Beside her, Elijah waited for her signal to begin, no longer directing, no longer controlling, but following her lead as he had learned to do through months of rebuilding. "Ready?" she asked, her voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm her. Elijah nodded, his eyes never leaving her face. "As I'll ever be." Together, they approached the podium situated before Stonehaven's central courtyard, a circular space paved with thousands of smooth stones set in concentric patterns. Each resident had placed one stone themselves during construction, transforming what had once been weapons into foundation, defense into home. Iona's fingers brushed against the small stone she still carried in her pocket, her father's last gift, the one she'd kept when she'd given all others away. Today, after the ceremony, she would place it in the last open space in the courtyard center. The final piece. Have you ever stood in a moment where your past and future touch? When everything you've survived becomes the reason you can build something new? 1 year ago, Iona began, her voice carrying across the hushed crowd. Most of us here had no permanent address. No security. No voice in the decisions that shaped our lives. She gestured to the buildings surrounding them. Not luxury towers of glass and steel, but sturdy structures designed for families and individuals in transition. Affordable homes. Medical facilities. Job training centers. Community gardens. A school. Today, we have not just homes, but a home. Not just buildings, but a community. The crowd applauded, many wiping tears. In the front row sat the former professor, now director of Stonehaven's mental health services. Beside him, elderly residents who thought they would die on the streets. Behind them, families with children who now had rooms of their own. Iona stepped back, yielding the microphone to Elijah. The gesture carried meaning beyond protocol, trust earned, not granted. Partnership proven, not promised. Elijah approached slowly, his movements still careful from injuries that had healed imperfectly. The physical reminder of choices made, prices paid. When people ask what Stonehaven cost, he began, they're usually talking about dollars. 450 million, if you're counting. A small smile. A bargain, considering what it's worth. He paused, looking across the faces before him, not as beneficiaries of his charity, but as partners in something revolutionary. But the real cost of Stonehaven can't be measured in money. It was paid in courage. In second chances. In the willingness to see beyond what is to what could be. His eyes found Iona's across the distance between them. And it began with a stone thrown in darkness by someone who refused to look away. Have you ever had your life changed by someone who owed you nothing? The stranger who stops when everyone else walks by. After the ceremony, after the crowds dispersed to tour buildings and share meals in new community spaces, Iona and Elijah found themselves alone in the stone courtyard. The setting sun painted everything in golden light, shadows lengthening across patterns laid by many hands. Your father would be proud, Elijah said quietly, watching as Iona knelt to place her final stone in the center space, the keystone that completed the design. She brushed her fingers across its smooth surface one last time before setting it in place. He taught me to throw, but never told me what to aim for. And now. Iona stood, dusting off her hands. Now I understand that aim is about more than hitting targets. It's about intention. Direction. Purpose. They walked the perimeter of the courtyard slowly, a ritual they developed through months of working side by side. Their relationship had evolved in ways neither had anticipated, not romantic in conventional terms, but intimate in ways that transcended physical connection. They had seen each other at their worst and best, broken and healing, falling and rising. What happens now? Elijah asked, echoing the question he'd posed a year before on empty ground. This time, Iona had an answer. Now we see if what we've built can stand on its own. She gestured to the community around them, people moving into new homes, children playing in safe spaces, dignity restored where only desperation had existed before. If they can thrive without us. The implication hung between them. Their work here was nearly complete. The Community Land Trust was established, residents trained for self-governance, systems in place for sustainability. Stonehaven no longer needed its founders to survive. And us? Elijah asked, the question soft but direct. Can we stand on our own? Iona stopped walking, turning to face him directly. The year had changed them both profoundly. Elijah was no longer the isolated billionaire insulated from humanity by wealth and power. She was no longer the invisible woman fighting daily for mere survival. They had become something else entirely. Something neither had words to fully define. I think, she said carefully, that's the question we've been avoiding all year. Above them, stars began to appear in deepening twilight. Around them, lights flickered on in new homes, lives beginning, futures unfolding, possibilities neither could have imagined that night in a rain-soaked alley. I was afraid to ask it, Elijah admitted. Afraid of your answer. And now? Now I'm ready. Whatever you decide. The honesty between them had always been their strength, raw, unfiltered, sometimes painful, but always real. It had carried them through conflict and collaboration, through misunderstanding and revelation. Iona reached into her pocket and pulled out something that gleamed in the fading light, a small, perfect stone she'd found that morning by the river. Not for throwing, not for building, but for giving. In some cultures, she said, placing it in his palm, stones aren't weapons or building materials. They're promises. Covenants between people who choose to walk the same path. Elijah's fingers closed around the stone, its warmth from her pocket transferring to his skin. What path are you choosing, Iona? The question contained all others, stay or go, together or apart, continue or conclude. I don't know yet, she answered honestly. But I know I'm not done throwing stones at the things that need changing. And I know I can't go back to being invisible. You never will be again, Elijah promised. Not to me. Not to anyone who knows your name now. Around them, Stonehaven pulsed with new life. Music from open windows, laughter from shared meals, the ambient sounds of community where emptiness had once prevailed. Their creation, but no longer theirs to control. Have you ever built something larger than yourself? Something that continues after you step away? As night fell completely, they sat on a bench in the stone courtyard, shoulders touching, the small space between them comfortable rather than charged. Above, stars wheeled in ancient patterns. Below, stones formed newer constellations of human design. My father told me once that the perfect throw isn't about strength, Iona said softly. It's about letting go at exactly the right moment. Elijah considered this, the stone still warm in his hand. Is that what we're doing now? Letting go. Of Stonehaven, yes. Her eyes met his in the darkness. Of each other. I'm not so sure. The ambiguity wasn't evasion but honesty, the recognition that what existed between them had never followed expected patterns. It had begun with violence and evolved through conflict. It had been forged in crisis and tested in creation. Whatever came next would be equally uncharted. I have a proposal, Elijah said finally. Not for Stonehaven. For us. Iona waited, neither encouraging nor refusing. There are other communities like this one was. Other systems that need changing. Other stones that need throwing. His voice gained strength with each word. We could find them. Together. The possibility stretched before them. Not an ending but a continuation. Not a relationship defined by conventional boundaries, but a partnership of purpose that might become something more over time. Not as savior and saved, Iona clarified. No, Elijah agreed. As equals. As whatever we choose to become. The night wrapped around them, infinite in its possibility. Below their feet, stones formed patterns that would outlast them both, physical reminders that small things, perfectly placed, could create something beautiful and enduring. "I'll think about it," Iona said, but her smile in the darkness held answer enough. Later, as they walked the perimeter of what they'd built together one final time, Iona paused to watch a family through an open window, parents tucking children into beds they owned, in a home that couldn't be taken from them, in a community they had helped design. "Sometimes I wonder," she said softly, "if you were meant to be in that alley that night. If I was meant to have those stones in my pocket. Do you believe in fate?" Elijah asked, genuine curiosity in his voice. Iona considered the question, watching the family's light go out as they settled into safety unimaginable a year before. "I believe in aim," she said finally. "In the power of knowing what matters enough to throw everything you have at it." As they turned to leave, their shadows merged on the stone pathway, no longer billionaire and maid, savior and saved, powerful and powerless. Just two people who had changed each other in ways neither could have predicted. And perhaps that was the truest aim of all, not to hit targets but to change trajectories. Not to destroy but to build. Not to wound but to heal. Sometimes the smallest throw changes the biggest hearts. Sometimes it's not strength that saves us, but aim. Sometimes all it takes is one stone, thrown with perfect intention, to crack the walls we build around ourselves, whether made of wealth and privilege or survival and fear. And in the spaces where those walls once stood, something new can grow, if we're brave enough to let it. As Stonehaven faded behind them, Iona and Elijah walked toward an uncertain future, carrying with them the only certainty that mattered, that some connections, once formed, become their own kind of foundation. Stronger than stone. More enduring than wealth. More powerful than fear. The kind of foundation on which anything, everything, can be built.